turn things over to Myra.
All right. Well, good morning, everybody. This is a day we've all been waiting for quite some time. And I have to say, absolutely delighted that Deputy Chief Ryan Diodati has joined us this morning. He's in his 26th year of policing services with the Hamilton Police Service. And in the past, he's been the command lead on a number of multi-jurisdictional major case management investigations that included domestic and international law enforcement agencies. He's actively engaged and dedicated to community service, partnerships, and volunteer citizen involvement, and currently serves on the board of directors for the John Howard Society of Hamilton, Burlington, and area, and the board of directors for the Eva Rothwell Center. He's a lifelong learner and promotes a learning organization and an advocate for professional development with an outcome of meeting current and future community expectations and needs. He is committed to community-based policing and in building, fostering, enhancing, and advancing strong and sustained partnerships with our communities and our community builders to achieve quality service in making Hamilton a safe place to live, work, learn, visit, and play. He's a member of the International Association of Chiefs of Police and the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police, as well as the Ontario Association of Chiefs of Police and the FBI Academy Associates, New York State, East Canada chapter. He's a graduate of the FBI National Academy in the United States Department of Justice, University of Virginia, and University of Toronto, Joseph L. Rothman School of Management, Police Leadership Program. He's also has a Bachelor of Arts from Niagara University. One of the things I just want to mention about Ryan, I can call him Ryan, I'm retired now. Anyway, is we were blessed to work together back in, I believe, if I got it right, Ryan, 1999. There was a time that I was proud to say I was his sergeant back in those days. And he was one of those guys that you recognized early on that he was going to go places with that organization. There's a lot of things on his bio that don't come out. I know that he was a member of our tactical unit for a period of time, and he had a number of other assignments that he wouldn't share with me because he's just too humble for that. But in any case, I just want to end before he takes over with many of you know that I was involved in the International Association of Women Police Training Conference in Niagara Falls in September. Well, both Ryan and Deputy Chief Paul Hamilton and Chief Bergen were incredibly, overtly supportive of that conference. They could be seen on a regular basis at many of the events, and I'll be forever grateful for the overt demonstration and support that he had for that conference in Niagara Falls. So thank you very much for that, Deputy Chief, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Myra, and thank you very much for that nice introduction. I appreciate it. And I'll speak to Myra and my connection a little bit later on. But Myra had asked me to do a presentation on our COVID response, and while it seems that it was in our rearview mirror for many of us, we're starting to hear some of the talk about mask mandates and everything else, and I somewhat shudder because it had been my life for not only my personal life, but in my professional life. So I'll take you back to March of 2020. And we started to hear rumblings in the media about, at the time, it was known as Corona. It was a virus. And I look back in our documents at work here, and it was March 3rd. And the first communication that came out to our membership was from our human resources director. And they put out a must read. So our must reads at the organization are an email blast, if you will. In our policy, it's something that you must, it's correspondence that every member of the organization, both civilian and sworn, must read. And it just spoke about this coronavirus. It's originating, in another continent. There's 18 confirmed cases in Ontario, and the risk was very low. And basically, the direction at that time was just make sure you wash your hands with soap, warm water and soap. But that was the direction that was provided. And as we all know, things escalated quite quickly from there. So again, as I mentioned, it's really taken a big portion of the last 2 years of my professional career here, as I was assigned as the executive lead for our response. So before I get into a quick presentation, and the slideshow should be in front of you. Could everyone see it? At least the introductory slide there.
No, we have to stop sharing it so everybody can see you when you're talking and when we're doing our business. You have to reshare it.
Okay, let me, how's that?
Yes, it's there.
Okay, great. Thank you. Again, I want to thank you for the opportunity to present to Rotary. I'm humbled, actually. Service above self, that actually resonates with me. One of our mission is to serve and protect in partnership with our communities, and it's something that drew me into a career in policing. I was a school teacher actually for 3 years prior to getting into policing. I taught English at the high school level. And just that draw to serve the community in a different way was something that certainly interested me. So we do have that connection for sure. So let me get back to the COVID response. So at the time, it was Chief Gert. He had asked me to be the lead on the response. And what is the first thing we do when we get asked to do something that we haven't necessarily done in the past? We look to what's been done in the past. So I started asking around, do we have a pandemic response? Do we, what kind of documents do we have? So we started scouring our database and everything else. And I can tell you, we found something. We found the influenza pandemic response plan from July of 2009. And I have it in front of me here, and it was 38 pages. I can tell you at the end of our response, our pandemic response, I've got 5 behind me, 5-inch binders full of documentation just from our response. So just in terms of the scope of that response, it was just massive. Okay, I just want to try and advance the slide here. It's not working here. There we go. So in terms of the system that we used the incident management system, or it's also known as the incident command system. And it's a province-wide system that allows different agencies, and it could be police, fire, city, emergency operations center, to manage a particular incident, whether it be a large one-day incident or a protracted incident, much like we experienced with the Corona COVID-19 pandemic, to ensure that we're covering all our bases and to ensure that we're working with our other stakeholders and having that interoperability. So again, an incident with the IMS is defined as an occurrence or an event that requires a coordinated response by emergency services or other responders to protect people, property, and the environment. And that's what we were certainly experiencing with COVID. Again, just briefly, the IMS is designed to be a response system, but it can be used to manage all stages of an incident. And these are just some of the different scenarios that IMS may be used. We've used it most recently in our organization with the homecoming events at McMaster to ensure that we were properly prepared for the homecoming events. And again, it just allows us to work with our other emergency partners and our external partners. And again, if we use our homecoming event as an example, McMaster University, we work very closely with McMaster University, as well as bylaw in regard to the nuisance bylaw. So again, just some of the different examples that IMS can be used. But again, for today's purposes, I can tell you this was the system that we employed for our response to the pandemic. So just in terms of the organizational chart, as you can see, I was the executive lead for the organization. Superintendent Sean Belay was our incident commander. And then the 4 pillars of IMS, and this is consistent for any incidents: operations, planning, logistics, and finance. And you'll see that we had actually 3 civilian members, both Leanne Snedden, Doris Chardulo, and Sanella Zedvari, are 3 civilian directors within the organization. Leanne is our director of human resources. Doris is our director of fleet and facilities. And Sanella is our director of finance. And then Superintendent Huss at the time, he's now retired, but he was our superintendent in Division 3. So you'll see it's a whole of service response, and it's not necessarily always geared towards our sworn commanders and personnel. We certainly have a role for our civilian directors that certainly assisted us greatly with our response to the pandemic. So just in terms of that response, and again, I'll try not to use too much police lingo, just so that you can kind of get a grasp of the scope of what we are dealing with. All chiefs bulletins are actually direction that we get from various ministries, whether they be Ministry of Health, the Solicitor General, the Attorney General, and essentially it's giving us direction. And they're called all chiefs because this direction is disseminated to all the chiefs throughout the province, including the commissioner of the OPP. And it provides us with guidance and direction as how we're going to deal with a particular situation. I can tell you 153 all chief bulletins. We would normally see that number over the course of 3 or 4 years. We saw 153 all chiefs bulletins come to us in essentially about 17 months. So this was, as you can recall, and again, you have to take yourself back to March of 2020 and how quickly things were changing. And from a law enforcement perspective, how many different things that we were tasked with and how many times we had to pivot and go into a different direction. So we had to actually action 153 all chiefs bulletins. The COVID updates that I'm citing here, 115, those were updates to our members, our must reads, if you will. So this was direct communication to all our members, both civilian and sworn, in terms of the ever-changing situation and status that COVID presented to us, again, in all facets. And I'll get into that briefly as I move through this presentation. I've kind of parceled off 5 main areas that we really had to ensure that we had our response in place. You'll see here our positive cases within the organization. We had 100. We've got approximately 1,167 full-time members. So we had a 9% positive rate for our members. In my view, that's outstanding. That speaks to the commitment of the members of our Hamilton Police Service, both, again, civilian and sworn, coming to work every day. Many of them did not have the opportunity to be able to work from home. I'll speak to that in a little bit about a work from home program, but many of them had to go out there, answer calls for service, get up close and personal with people, you know, whether it be speaking to people, whether it be using force on someone, whether it be providing CPR, providing someone with Narcan to, you know, because they're in a drug psychosis or they've gone vital signs absent because they've used fentanyl or another opiate-based drug. So again, they don't, you know, our members don't always have that discretionary time to be able to put the PPE on and make sure that they're safe. They have to get in there very quickly. So again, to only have approximately 100 positive cases with all those interactions is just incredible. And then the Quarantine Act. And again, you may have forgotten that there was an actual Quarantine Act where if you tested positive, you had to quarantine at home. We conducted 565 quarantine checks during that time. So just some incredible work by members of the Hamilton Police Service. Just quickly here, you'll just see some, again, it's just a quick chart just for how you can see the progression of the virus and how it affected our members, the number of tests that were completed by our members. And I'll get into that whole testing program that we had to put into place. Again, it was uncharted territory for essential workers and how we were going to work through our vaccine policy as well as our testing policy. So you could look through that very quickly. You'll see the height of things, September 2020 right up until May 2021. That was the heart of the positive, or the heart of the positive cases and the heart of the number of tests that were completed. We had 3 outbreaks declared in our police service, and an outbreak by public health was more than 2 cases in a particular area. So again, all things being considered, and the number of community contacts that we have with members of the community, that's quite good. Just for context, again, when we talk about community contacts, we have approximately 305,000 community contacts in a given year. So those are calls for service, those are traffic stops, those are community-based policing initiatives, those are doing school lockdown drills, all those types of things. So Again, when you look at the big picture with, 100 positive cases with all those community contacts, quite astonishing. You'll see from a communications branch, these are the number of calls that our communication branch received during that time period from April of 2020 till April 2022. Again, you'll see in that time period, calls that were classified as COVID-19 related calls, calls that we diverted to bylaw, calls that we diverted to public health, and then other types of calls. But you can see on some months there, 363 calls, 382 calls, that our communication branch is the first point of contact. So then we would triage the call, say, okay, this is more appropriately handled by bylaw, or this is a police response, or we'll put you in contact with public health. So the drain on the resources just in terms of those calls and the types of calls we would get would be, you know what, Myra's my neighbor, and I know that I saw her coughing in her backyard. I'm sure she's COVID positive. And again, this is at the beginning of COVID, but I saw her walking down the street. I don't think she should be out of her house. So at the beginning, we would go to that type of call because again, it was the unknown. If you recall, you know what, the thought of someone breathing on you who might have COVID might mean a death sentence for you. So again, talking about it 2.5 years later, it doesn't necessarily have the same impact it did when we were living it at the time. So I'll just touch on some of these, and again, don't worry yourself about all the different things on the next two slides. It just speaks to some key dates that we had throughout and some of the things that we had to contemplate as we worked through the pandemic. And again, when we go back, and if you recall that the quarantines and all the businesses that were shut down, the schools were shut down, our rate of commercial break and enters skyrocketed because let's face it, most of the businesses were shut down. Yes, there are alarm systems at a lot of these businesses, but again, thieves at the commercial break and enters, we saw a huge rise in that. So these are some of the things that again, our first responders were out there answering calls for service. Were deemed to be essential workers. They didn't have the ability to work from home. Obviously, you know, especially our frontline people can't respond to calls from home. They had to be in their cruisers. They can't say no to a call. You know, certain investigations, such as sudden death investigations at the beginning, a sudden and unexpected death, sometimes suspected to be COVID. So now our members have to go in there. And again, if you're not familiar with what a police role is in a sudden death investigation, you know, often people think that we just respond to deaths that are because of foul play, murders, that type of thing, car accidents. But if there's a sudden unexpected death in a home, we respond to all of those. So when we went into many of these homes, nursing homes, senior assisted living homes, and just regular residential homes, our members didn't know whether or not the cause of death was because of COVID. So just in terms of having the proper PPE or you know, personal protection equipment on was crucial. So brings me to my first point, personal protection equipment. How do we get that at that time when there's such a shortage? Again, as a police service, we don't plan to have thousands and thousands of nitrile gloves. We don't plan to have thousands and thousands of surgical masks, disinfectant, hand sanitizer. So as you can imagine, and as you probably remember, at that time, there was a worldwide shortage of surgical masks. We quickly ran out of the masks that we had in stock. So we were so desperate for masks, we actually went to costume shops throughout the city of Hamilton, and we were begging and borrowing and buying masks that they had them in costume shops. We got lucky. They had 500 for, I don't know, I guess probably doctors and nurses costumes at Halloween, but we bought them. We were trying to be as resourceful as we could, and giving them to our members and saying, you have to guard this mask with your life because we don't know when we're going to get more masks. And we had to be able to work through our health and safety committee to ensure that the masks that we were providing were actually certified masks. We couldn't get just masks from anyone, say, here, these are their masks or cloth masks that weren't rated to properly protect their members. So that was probably our first challenge. We had donated from Dillon's Distillery alcohol for making our own hand sanitizer. Luckily, we didn't need to use it, but we had 2 pallets in our storage down here at our central police station, just in case we weren't able to work our way and get our sanitizer. So our Doris Chardula was our director of fleet facilities. She did an outstanding job of sourcing PPE for our members to ensure that when they went into these calls for service, they were properly prepared. Travel advisory. If you recall, there was a travel advisory. This started just before March break. So we had members who had already left the country when this all took place. So they're coming back. So we had a mandatory policy put into place. It was a standing order from the chief. And if you had left the country, one, you had to get permission from the chief. When you came back, it was a mandatory 2-week quarantine. And again, that time would be your time, your own sick time. This wouldn't be any kind of other time that you could use for it, because again, there was an order not to leave the country. So that was something, again, from a policing perspective, when we're as an organization and the chief is putting it out in order that you're not allowed to leave the country. It was quite provocative for a number of members, but we were able to work with that. The Solicitor General provided us a portal, a COVID portal, if you will. And what that portal included was information for anyone in our city who had tested positive for COVID. So when our members went to a particular address, 155 King William Street, we would go into that address knowing that Myra James lived at that address and she had tested positive for COVID. So that would allow our officers to put their masks on, put capes on, put goggles on, put all the necessary personal protection equipment on before going into that. I can tell you it was wrought with issues from the very beginning. The portal was, it had a number of errors in it. Again, this was in April of 2020, when there were many things still not known about COVID and what the symptoms were, what the impact would be on someone's life if they were exposed to it. So we relied heavily on this portal, only to find out that the Privacy Commission was going to investigate all the police services for their use of the portal, because the data in the portal was so poor that streets would be spelled incorrectly. So King William might be spelled with 1 L. So our communications people would try it a number of different ways. And the Privacy Commission came out and said that we were abusing the system. So I had to spend 3 weeks working with the Privacy Commission to show them and to demonstrate why we used the portal the way we did. And again, it was to protect our members, because everyone else was shelter in place in their home. Businesses were closed. No one was going to school. People weren't walking on the streets, but our officers were still expected to answer all these calls for service. So we had to do everything to protect our members. So we worked through that with the Privacy Commission, and I'm glad to tell you that we weren't at the end of it found to be in breach of any of the Privacy Commission's concerns. And then finally, just in terms of the vaccination. Mandatory vaccination policies. And I'm sure, again, in your own experiences in your workplace or your personal life, that choice to get vaccinated or not, it certainly pitted people against each other. And when we should have been coming together, it seemed that this vaccination was pulling people apart. In any event, we made a decision as an organization to implement a mandatory vaccination policy. What that meant was you had to have your first 2 shots to come into the workplace. If you didn't, you would have to get tested daily to come into the workplace. That test would be on your own dime. You would have to pay for that test. And again, if you recall at the very beginning of testing, it was very expensive. It's not like now where they're passing tests out regularly for a low amount of money. It was very expensive. So that upset some of our members. Some members didn't want to get vaccinated, but at the same time, felt that they shouldn't have to bear the cost of having to test daily. So that was our first standing policy that we put out. Our association, our union, if you will, reached out to me and said, can we have some further discussion on this policy? Our membership is upset with the fact that they have to pay for their own tests. So we went to the table and we negotiated with the association. We were able to work out an agreement. We were able to source some tests for our frontline members where they were provided to us for free. So we extended that to our members. So I'm glad to say that over 90% of our members did actually comply and comply with the mandatory vaccination policy. So we had about 46 members every day testing COVID to come into the workplace. The rest were double vaccinated. So that was a real pivotal time in the organization, just in terms of, again, that different mindset where, you know, can you tell me to get vaccinated? And if you don't, you know, I'm not going to be able to get paid. So again, overall, from looking at other police services in Ontario, we shared our standing order on the mandatory vaccination, and it was a gold standard in the province. Many of the other police services, larger police services like Toronto, adopted our policy. And again, at the end of the day, we had one member of 1,167 members, one member choose not to vaccinate or choose the alternative test every day and decide to stay off of work unpaid. So again, that speaks, in my view, at least, to the commitment of our members to deliver public safety every day to our citizens. And again, something that I'm quite proud of. The last thing I'm going to talk about before I just move into a different direction is our work from home. Again, we're essential workers, and we looked at who can we send home in terms of limiting the exposure of bringing the virus into the workplace to limit our outbreaks. As I mentioned, we had 3 outbreaks. So we were able to identify approximately 100 members who could do their job from home. Those members included people in our records department, our IT department, some members in our human resources department, but we didn't have the infrastructure in place in terms of laptops and connectivity to all our networks, because as you can imagine, our firewalls and our security for a lot of the systems that we use here are quite high. So we had to work quite vigorously with our IT director to put that infrastructure in place in quick order. The other pressure that we had was we were fearful that our single point of failure in terms of our expertise investigators, and you know, example, I'll use our homicide investigators. We have 12 homicide investigators. Their level of expertise in investigating the worst crime, if you will, is such that if one member gets infected with the virus and infects the rest of the members in the office, and we have a homicide, who's going to investigate that homicide? Our forensic services officers, again, very specialized service. We had to be mindful of that. Our sexual assault unit, our investigators who investigate child exploitation, our tech crime investigators. These are all investigations that can't stop. We can't say, you know what, we had a homicide, but we have to wait 2 weeks for our members to get out of quarantine and we'll come investigate it. A child that's being exploited or abused. We don't have the luxury to say, you know what, we just give us a couple of weeks here and we'll get on that. We have to investigate that. So we worked out rotations where we didn't have everyone in the office at the same time. We had people working from home as much as they could just to protect continuity of services so that, again, they would be uninterrupted. So to ensure that, again, we're providing that quality service to the members. So those were the biggest pressures that we experienced throughout the pandemic. And again, these are things that moving in as the executive lead for the organization, it just wasn't something that anyone had ever considered. We have a good blueprint now. Hopefully in my career, I don't see it again. Again, we're hearing about these mask mandates and everything, and the rest of my team is just shuddering to think that we would go back into that direction of having the quarantines and that type of thing. So I'm, you know, again, I'm very, very hopeful that we don't go there. So that's essentially, you know, the pressures that we had to deal with. Obviously, all the enforcement that we had to deal with, the acts that we had to enforce throughout with businesses, mask mandates, and everything else that we had to deal with throughout that pandemic, and we're clearly not out of it. But those were the pressures that I can tell you kept me up at night often throughout the COVID pandemic. So if there's any questions, I'll answer those now. I do have one other little piece that of a presentation, and I'll be brief. I know your time is short here, but I've got about 5 minutes here if I could. But before I go to the next slide, I'd just like to open it up for any questions that anyone may have.
Any questions out there, folks? Comments?
Ryan, I have a question for you.
Yes.
Was of the 100 people that were had the opportunity to work from home, was it a bit of a challenge trying to justify or trying to get them back into the workforce, back into physically coming in to their whatever station that they're working out of, and was it done where they found out on a Friday, they're returning to the workplace on a Monday, or was it a graduated kind of return to the workplace kind of scenario?
That's a great question, Myra. And you know what? That's what we didn't want to do. We knew that there was a lot of apprehension and anxiety coming back into the workplace. So we gave them 3 weeks notice that we were going to do a gradual return into the workplace. So we worked very closely with our HR department as well as our occupational health people to ensure that this reintegration into the workplace was gradual. So the first week they came back for 1 day. The next week they came back for 3 days and 5 days, and finally back to a full work week. So we did that over the course of actually 6 weeks. And I can tell you, we didn't have anyone go back off of work or book off of work because of that stress or that anxiety of coming back into the workplace. Great question, Myra. Thank you.
Anything else? All right, go ahead, Ryan.
Okay. The next part of my presentation, and Myra didn't ask for this, but you know what? Myra has been a mentor of mine, and something that Myra did early on, or that I saw early on in my career, before it was cool to do it. Myra advanced women in policing like I have never seen before. Myra was a pioneer of getting women into a career in policing. Let's face it, a male-dominated career. And she, at the very early stages, was looking and mentoring young women in the organization. And I saw that every day. And she continues to do it, as she mentioned at the beginning of your meeting there, where she's going to another OWL conference to work with her sisters-in-law again to advance women in policing. So I've got, I think, 3 slides here. I just want to talk to you about the impact that Myra has had on the organization with women leaders in our organization. So you'll see very quickly here, 1958, the first 3 female officers were hired in Hamilton. And in the first 3 decades, only 18 female officers were hired. I mean, just staggering low numbers. In 2014, female officers made up 21.1% of all H.P.S. sworn officers, which was above the provincial average of 18.9% and the national average of 20.2%. Again, this is a lot to do with the work that Myra did. Again, informally, we didn't have a mentoring program. We didn't tap Myra on the shoulder. And when I say we, I mean, again, I worked for Myra. She was my boss, but the bosses weren't tapping Myra on the shoulder and saying, hey, Myra, come on, you need to do this. You need to get a better female representation in the service here. We need to better reflect the community that we serve. This was Myra doing it off the side of her desk in her own time and doing that mentoring that was so impactful for so many of our members. Again, here you'll see the representation by rank of constables, both men and women here in terms of the number of sergeants and staff sergeants. Our numbers continue to grow in our supervisory ranks, and where we're seeing our biggest growth now, and it's going to take time because it's, again, you saw the numbers earlier on, we weren't hiring as many women in the organization. So it's going to take a bit of time to catch up in terms of our supervisory positions, but we're starting to reap the rewards of the work that Myra and many other women in our organization are doing. So staff sergeants and senior command here, you'll see now in our senior command, 16%. We have 2 female superintendents in our organization now, 1 inspector. Myra, I don't know the last time we had 2 female superintendents in the organization serving at the same time, but it would go back to probably Debbie Clark and geez, I don't know if they served at the same time. Myra, you might even be able to comment on that.
I think for a short period of time that Linda Bowen and Debbie Clark were or both superintendents at the same time.
Same time, yeah. So again, I'm really encouraged by the numbers. We've got some bright young women in the organization that are coming up through the ranks, and we are certainly going to see these numbers, leveling off and having better representation from our females at both the mid-management level and at the command level. And again, many of the women, we now have an internal support network for women in the organization. Superintendent Trina McSween, Superintendent Robin Abbott, Inspector Andrea Torrey, all women I admire in the organization. And again, all have been mentored by Myra James. At the IWP conference in Niagara Falls there about a month ago, I had the opportunity, as Myra mentioned, to spend some time there. And you should count yourself lucky to have Myra as a part of your group, because I can tell you internationally she's known. She was like a rock star at this conference here, with all the different delegates from all the different countries wanting to have pictures with her. But we're most proud, and we're so grateful to have her as an ambassador of the Hamilton Police Service. Again, not only to encourage women in policing, but just to be ambassador for a Hamilton Police Service and everything that we stand for. So again, that's something that I just wanted to make sure that the group was aware of, and the fruits of Myra's labor, back in the early and late 90s and through to the early 2000s is certainly paying dividends. And I wanted to thank Myra personally for that, and let her know how proud we are of her and the work that she does, not only for the H.P.S, but in the community as well. So that's my presentation. I think I probably went over time a little bit. I could have talked probably for another 2 hours, but I certainly do appreciate the time that you afforded me. And again, I'm humbled to be in front of you. And thank you for all the outstanding work that you do for our community and in our community.
Thank you, Ryan. We're going to just open up the floor. Is there any comments or questions for Ryan? By the way, I muted everybody while he was talking because I was getting feedback. No, I think we're good. Tina, would you like to take care of things for me?
Absolutely. Well, so Ryan, wow, thank you. If I can, sorry, I'm taking the liberty of calling you Ryan while I can, while I'm not,
and that's fine.
Well, I'm
that's
not
fine.
being pulled over in my car by you. I work for the Halton Children's Aid Society, so on a smaller scale, I can appreciate a little of what the police services went through coping with COVID. When you work for an organization that already has immense responsibilities in the community, and you throw into the mix something as life-changing as the pandemic, that none of us had ever experienced before. So, and I've said often that weddings and funerals and pandemics bring out the best and the worst in people. And so I'm sure the police service found themselves dealing with compassionate people, but also many impatient people, worried people, angry people, every emotion that you can think of. And thank you so much for really drilling down and giving us a clear picture of many of the things that you were dealing with that we may not have thought of before, and fielding those calls. And again, the people that are similar to CAS, that are concerned about their neighbors, sometimes overly concerned, sometimes rightfully concerned, but you're dealing with that and having to make decisions on the fly sometimes with limited information. And you referenced, what we know now, essentially, in hindsight, when we look back, some of the things that we were asked to do, weren't necessary. But again, it's easy to sit back and be judgmental about how things were handled. If you weren't in the mix and helping with that decision making, I think people need to be mindful of that and be, careful where they share their opinions. So all of that to say how much we appreciate having the police service. I mean, again, who do we call when we're in trouble, right? It's the first call. And so we appreciate that we have such a rock solid group in our midst. Thank you for shining the light on our dear friend Myra. We are very proud of her. It's hard to keep up with where she is in the world from one week to the next, but certainly, and we also know that she is very proud of her role with the police services and her history and longevity. And I also recognize how diverse our Hamilton Police Service has become, not just with females in the mix, but the whole cultural background of officers to meet our very varied citizenship in Hamilton. So I appreciate that. And lastly, to let you know that really a primary service of Rotary is to provide vaccinations to children throughout the world against polio. And we are this close to eradicating it fully throughout the world. And so in recognition of your presentation this morning, the club has made a donation to Rotary International to vaccinate 40 children against polio in your name.
Oh, wow. That is, thank you.
Well, on that note, I'd like to say thank you for joining us so early this morning, you know, with the snow, but at least it's virtual. And thank you. And hopefully we'll see you again. Presenting, not arresting.
Not in the rear view mirror.